So, I want to ask you a question. Do you remember Rodney King's famous plea from back in 1992?
Oh yeah, can we all get along?
Exactly. Can we all get along? And at the time, he was speaking directly in the aftermath of the Los Angeles riots. But if you look around today, I mean, most people are asking that exact same question about something else entirely.
The near total collapse of cooperation.
Right. Across political lines, religious lines, it feels like every single time you turn on the news or, open a social media app or honestly even sit down for a family dinner, you are getting front row dispatches from a cultural war zone.
The landscape has definitely become fractured. And well, that fracture is the driving reason behind the sources we're looking at today. We're taking a deep dive into excerpts from Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion.
And our mission for this deep dive is pretty ambitious. We are going to attempt to map out the actual underlying architecture of human morality.
We really want to figure out why it is so incredibly hard for people to simply get along.
Yeah, and explore how understanding our innate moral psychology might actually help drain the heat and the anger out of our most divisive topics. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because the way the source material exposes that moral architecture is brilliant, but honestly, it is designed to make you a little uncomfortable.
It definitely pulls no punches.
Not at all. To kick things off, I want you, the listener, to imagine a few very specific scenarios. First, imagine a family whose pet dog is tragically killed by a car right in front of their house.
Ooh, this one is tough.
It is. Now, this family has heard that dog meat is considered a delicacy in certain parts of the world, so they decide to cut up the dog's body, cook it, and eat it for dinner. They do this entirely in the privacy of their own home, and absolutely nobody sees them do it.
It's a profoundly visceral image to put in someone's mind. The reaction is almost instantaneous for most people.
I know my stomach did a little flip just reading it. Now, hold on to that feeling and imagine a second scenario. A woman is cleaning out her closet and finds an old, ratty American flag. She doesn't want it anymore, so she cuts it up into pieces and uses the rags to scrub her bathroom toilet.
Which is another strong image.
Right. Or how about a third scenario? A man buys a whole, dead chicken at the supermarket. Before cooking it, he decides to have sexual intercourse with the carcass. Then he cooks it thoroughly and eats it. Again, he lives alone, and this is done completely in private.
When you present these stories to people, the psychological response is almost entirely uniform. You hear the story, and you instantly feel this blinding flash of disgust. You want to immediately condemn the actions and declare, that is completely morally wrong.
Right.
But the research gets truly fascinating when psychologists actually press people to explain the reasoning behind their condemnation. The sources refer to what happens next as moral dumbfounding.
Because if you really look at the facts of every single one of those scenarios, no one is actually being harmed. I mean, the dog was already dead from the car accident. The flag is literally just a piece of dyed cloth that the woman legally owned. And the chicken was already processed and going to be eaten anyway.
Exactly. There's no victim.
But instead of people looking at the facts and concluding, well, no harm, no foul, they start stammering. You can see their brains working in overdrive to desperately invent victims that simply do not exist in the prompt. They'll start throwing out excuses like, well, the flag rags are going to clog the plumbing and cause the toilet to overflow.
Or the family might catch a terrible disease from eating the dog meat.
Yes. And the researchers actually anticipate those responses. When the interviewer gently pushes back and reminds the subject that the story explicitly rules out those harms, like pointing out the dog was thoroughly cooked or the toilet didn't clog, the subjects do not change their minds.
Not at all. They don't suddenly say, oh, you're right, I guess it is highly moral behavior. They just throw their hands up and say, I know it's wrong, I just can't think of a logical reason why.
Which is wild.
It is. And this phenomenon brings us to the central metaphor of our entire deep dive today. The human mind is divided, and it looks a lot like a tiny rider sitting on the back of a massive elephant.
I absolutely love this metaphor. It perfectly captures that feeling of knowing something in your gut but not having the words for it. Let's break down the two parts.
So, the rider in this metaphor represents our conscious verbal reasoning. It is the analytical part of your brain that talks, plans, and genuinely believes it is the one in charge of the whole operation.
But statistically speaking,
the rider is only handling about 1% of your mental processing. The elephant represents the other 99%. The elephant is your automatic, intuitive, and highly emotional processing center. It operates entirely outside of your conscious awareness, and crucially, It is the thing actually governing the vast majority of your behavior.
So the elephant is the gut reaction going, ooh, don't eat the dog. And the writer is the one scrambling to find a scientific reason about bacteria to explain the ew.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. But it is worth noting that for thousands of years, Western philosophy had this dynamic completely backward. The sources highlight thinkers like Plato, and much later, prominent moral psychologists like Lawrence Kohlberg. They suffered from what Haidt calls the rationalist delusion.
Which is the idea that logic rules everything.
Exactly. They operated on the assumption that reason, the writer, could and absolutely should rule over our passions and emotions. They viewed the writer as the master, holding the reins, forcibly steering the dumb beast of emotion toward logical truth.
It's a comforting thought, right? That we are these highly evolved, perfectly rational creatures.
Comforting, perhaps, but scientifically inaccurate. It was actually the 18th century philosopher David Hume who saw through the delusion. Hume controversially argued that reason is and ought only to be the servant of the passion. Yes. From an evolutionary standpoint, the writer did not evolve to boss the elephant around. The writer evolved specifically to serve the elephant.
The experiments the sources provide to back up Hume's theory are just incredible to read. For instance, my favorite is the roach juice experiment.
That one is unforgettable.
Researchers brought ordinary people into a lab and showed them a completely sterilized, lab-raised cockroach. And they didn't just wash it, they put the roach in an autoclave, the machine hospitals use to sterilize surgical instruments, just to be absolutely chemically certain that not a single germ or bacteria could possibly survive.
Right.
Then, right in front of the subject, they dipped that sterile roach into a glass of delicious apple juice using a standard tea strainer and simply asked the person to take a sip.
And the results speak volumes about who is really in charge.
Yeah.
Almost nobody is willing to take a sip of that juice.
None of them.
Pure logic tells the writer that the juice is perfectly safe. There is zero threat of disease. But the elephant takes one look at the roach, screams disgusting, and firmly plants its feet. The writer cannot force the elephant to take the drink.
There's another one that highlights this even better, the selling your soul experiment. Researchers sat down with people and offered them $2 in cash to sign a seemingly simple piece of paper. The paper read, "I hereby sell my soul after my death."
Just for $2.
Right. Now, before anyone signed, the researchers explicitly stated and pointed to bold letters on the page that this was not a binding legal or spiritual contract. It was strictly a prop for a psychology experiment. They even told the subjects they could rip up the piece of paper into tiny confetti immediately after signing it, throw it in the trash, and still keep the $2.
And the hesitation people experience in that scenario is profound. Even subjects who proudly identified as staunch atheists, people whose conscious writers firmly believed that souls do not even exist, hesitated or completely refused to put their name on the paper.
Which makes no logical sense for an atheist.
None. Their writers understood it was just a meaningless piece of paper in a sterile lab, but their elephants felt a deep, ancient, intuitive dread. When push comes to shove, people listen to their gut, not their logic.
But wait, the sources do mention one specific type of person who is the exception to this rule, and it's a pretty chilling exception: psychopaths.
That is the terrifying part of the data. Psychopaths have fully functioning reasoning capabilities. In fact, they are often exceptionally brilliant at logic, calculation, and cause and effect planning. What they severely lack are moral emotions. They simply do not feel compassion, guilt, shame, or even mild embarrassment.
So if we bring it back to our metaphor, a psychopath is basically a writer without an elephant.
That is exactly the profile. And this completely shatters the rationalist delusion. If Plato and Kohlberg were right, if pure, unclouded reasoning were the true source of human morality, then psychopaths, who are unburdened by messy emotions, should be the most moral people walking among us.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
But the research shows the exact opposite. They are highly dangerous individuals. They tend to live in a world comprised entirely of objects, some of which just happen to walk around on two legs. Without the elephant's sudden, intuitive flashes of sympathy for a victim or revulsion at a cruel act, the writer's pristine logic just becomes a highly efficient tool for manipulation and self-interest.
That makes me think about how we all process daily information. I want you to take a second and reflect on your own rapid aha judgments. Think about the last time you read a polarizing headline or heard a juicy piece of office gossip. How often does your elephant lean toward a conclusion instantly, within milliseconds?
Almost always.
And then you find your writer left scrambling, desperately trying to construct a logical-sounding argument to justify the feeling you already have.
If we zoom out and connect this internal process to the bigger picture of society, it explains a massive amount of our social behavior. The sources introduce a famous thought experiment from ancient Greece to illustrate this. Plato's brother, Glaucon, posed a challenge using the medical ring of Gyges.
The invisibility ring?
Yes, it was a magical ring that granted the wearer complete, undetectable invisibility. Glaucon argued that if a normal person were handed this ring and became invisible, they would immediately start acting unjustly. They would bypass the law, steal what they wanted, and exact revenge on their enemies. His core argument was that human beings only act morally because we fear the social consequences of getting caught.
We act morally primarily to protect our reputations.
Exactly.
And according to the modern psychological research we are diving into, Glaucon essentially nailed it. When we are out navigating the social world, we don't behave like objective scientists objectively searching for absolute truth. We act like intuitive politicians. We are obsessively tracking our own poll numbers. We care deeply about what our peers think of us, even if we put up a tough front and pretend we don't care at all.
Which shifts the role of the writer entirely. If we are operating as intuitive politicians in our daily lives, we need a mechanism to handle our public relations.
Oh, this is where the press secretary analogy comes in. Think about the press secretary for a major politician. The press secretary doesn't sit in the Oval Office and set the actual policy. And they certainly don't stand up at the briefing podium, listen to a reporter's question and say, you know what? The opposing party makes a really solid point there. My boss is totally wrong on this issue.
Never. The press secretary's sole job is damage control and spin. Their function is to automatically and forcefully justify whatever the president, or in our metaphor, the intuitive elephant, has already decided to do. The writer's job isn't to evaluate the truth of a situation. It's to quickly manufacture arguments that will convince the rest of the tribe that your elephant is righteous and justified.
But surely intelligence plays a factor here, right? You would think that highly intelligent people with massive IQs, would be better at overcoming this bias. You'd assume a higher IQ makes your writer more objective.
That is a very common assumption. But a reasoning researcher named David Perkins actually put it to the test. He gathered people of various ages, backgrounds, and education levels and asked them to think deeply about complex social issues. The task was simple. Write down all the possible reasons you can think of on both sides of the argument.
Let me guess. The people with the higher IQs didn't suddenly become objective referees.
Not even close. Higher intelligence does not make a person more open-minded, and it doesn't make them any better at seeing the opposing side of an issue. It simply makes them a much more formidable lawyer for their own side.
Wow.
People with higher IQs were able to generate a vastly larger number of my-side arguments. They essentially used their extra brain power and processing speed to build a thicker fortress around their own predetermined beliefs, rather than exploring the issue even-handedly.
That perfectly explains the endless Google searches we all do. Think about the last time you made a completely impulse purchase, like an expensive tech gadget. Your elephant wanted it. You bought it, and then suddenly your writer, your inner press secretary, started aggressively Googling reviews to draft a mental press release for your spouse, explaining how this gadget is actually going to save the family money in the long run.
We do this every day.
We really do. And the sources point to researcher Tom Gilovich, who boils this down to the two magic questions of motivated reasoning.
Gilovich's framework is incredibly insightful. It comes down to what we want the outcome to be. When we want to believe something, let's say we see a new study that proves our preferred political party has been right all along, we ask ourselves the first magic question: can I believe it?
Right, can I?
We are looking for permission. We just need to search for one single piece of pseudo-evidence, one vaguely credible source, to grant our elephant permission to believe it wholeheartedly.
But when we absolutely don't want to believe something, like a glaring statistic showing our favorite candidate just did something terrible, we shift gears. We ask the second magic question: must I believe it? And then we start frantically searching for just one tiny flaw. We look for a typo in the report, a questionable funding source, or a slight error in the methodology. We just need one tiny escape hatch so our press secretary can confidently dismiss the entire thing as fake news.
So if we're all walking around asking, must I believe this? Every time we encounter an inconvenient fact, what happens when you multiply that behavior by millions of people participating in a democracy? The sources argue this is exactly why modern politics has evolved into an uncompromising team sport.
Yeah.
And it is crucial to apply this impartially. The research emphasizes that this psychological mechanism applies to everyone equally across the entire political spectrum. Politics is inherently groupish, not selfish. We often operate under the assumption that people vote strictly based on their own economic self-interest, but decades of data show that simply isn't the primary driver.
Right. People aren't asking what is best for my wallet. They are asking what does this policy mean for my group? We are using our conscious reasoning as a badge of social membership. It is a way to signal to the world that we are loyal to our team. We take these incredibly nuanced, multi-layered policy debates and treat them like bumper stickers we slap on our cars so the people driving behind us know exactly what tribe we belong to.
Which brings us to a major structural turning point in how we understand human morality. If we accept that we are driven by our intuitive elephants and our riders are just loyal press secretaries spinning the narrative, we have to ask, what exactly are our elephants responding to?
Right. What are the triggers?
Exactly. To answer that, we have to confront a massive blind spot in the scientific community. Most of the foundational research in psychology has been conducted on a very specific and frankly very unusual subset of the global population. The sources refer to them using the acronym WEIRD.
Weird. Like eccentric or strange?
It's an acronym that stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic.
Ah, I see. So if you were listening to this deep dive on a smartphone or a laptop right now, there is a very high probability you live in a weird society. But why does studying Western college students skew the data so much?
Because weird people are statistical outliers on a global scale. They are arguably the least typical, least representative demographic you could possibly study if your goal is to make broad generalizations about innate human nature.
How so?
The fundamental difference lies in perception. Weird people are conditioned to be highly analytical. When they look at the world, they see a landscape full of separate, autonomous objects. But the vast majority of the rest of the world, and indeed most of human history, processes the world holistically. They do not see isolated objects, they see interconnected relationships, rich contexts, and interdependent groups.
To explain how this analytical worldview limits our understanding of morality, the sources use this amazing analogy. I want you to imagine you walk into a brand new restaurant in your city called the True Taste. You sit down, open the menu, and you notice the sections are incredibly strange. The appetizers are under sugars, the entrees are listed under honeys and free saps, and the desserts are artificials.
It's a bizarre menu.
Totally. The owner walks over to your table and cheerfully explains that because evolutionary biology proves human beings are hardwired to love sweet things, he has opened a restaurant that exclusively serves sweeteners.
As a culinary concept, it sounds absurd. You'd be craving salt or spice or savory flavors within minutes. But the sources argue that weird moral philosophy has done exactly this to our understanding of ethics. For centuries, Western philosophers have attempted to reduce the vast complexity of human morality down to a single, easily digestible principle. And almost universally, they have focused exclusively on concepts of harm, welfare, and fairness.
This is where the heavy academic hitters come in, right? Like Jeremy Bentham. He was the philosopher behind utilitarianism. As I understand it, he basically looked at morality purely as a math problem. How do we maximize pleasure and minimize pain for the greatest number of people? The ultimate needs of the many logic. And then you have Immanuel Kant, who is all about deontology, creating universal, unbreakable rules that protect individual rights above all else.
Exactly. Both Bentham and Kant created brilliant frameworks, but according to our true taste metaphor, they are serving up a one-receptor morality, a morality consisting entirely of sweeteners. And there is a highly controversial but fascinating hypothesis presented in the sources regarding why this happened. Researchers looking back at biographical data note that both Bentham and Kant possessed cognitive and behavioral traits that closely align with Asperger's syndrome.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the implication of that. The sources are suggesting that because they had that specific cognitive profile, they built massive, brilliantly logical frameworks, but entirely missed the messy, emotional, social stuff.
That is the core of the hypothesis. People with those traits are often incredibly high systemizers. They are unparalleled at identifying patterns and building complex rule-based systems. But they often score exceptionally low as empathizers. They can struggle to intuitively understand the subtle, chaotic, and heavily emotional social lives of other people. So they built moral systems that reflect a highly systematized, unemotional view of human interaction.
So if harm and fairness, Bentham and Kant's systems are just the sweet receptors on our moral tongues, what are the other flavors? What is the savory, the spicy, the bitter that the rest of the non-weird world is tasting?
To broaden the moral palette, the sources turn to the work of anthropologist Richard Schwitter. Schwitter traveled extensively and identified three major clusters of moral themes, which he called ethics, that are utilized by cultures around the world. The first is the ethic of autonomy.
Okay, this is the sweetener. This is the one weird people know intimately. It is based entirely on the idea that people are separate, autonomous individuals who have specific wants and needs. In this matrix, the only point of morality is to protect individuals from harm and ensure everyone is treated fairly.
Correct. But then Schwitter introduces the ethic of community. This ethic operates on the fundamental belief that people are first and foremost members of larger entities. They are parts of families, sports teams, armies, tribes, and nations. In this moral framework, the highest good is protecting and valuing those groups. It relies heavily on savory concepts like duty, hierarchy, respect for elders, and patriotism.
And finally, there is the ethic of divinity. This view shifts the perspective entirely. It sees the human body not just as a biological animal trying to maximize pleasure, but as a sacred temple housing a divine soul. Morality in this ethic is all about sanctity. It is about avoiding physical and spiritual pollution, preventing degradation, and actively suppressing our base carnal instincts.
The author of our source text, Jonathan Haidt, details a powerful personal experience regarding these different ethics. He describes himself as a liberal, secular academic from America, the definition of weird. But he traveled to Bhubaneswar, India, to conduct field research. Initially, he experienced profound culture shock. He was suddenly immersed in a society that was highly self-segregated, deeply hierarchical, and devoutly religious. His writer was constantly critiquing everything around him.
But then his natural human empathy started to kick in. Because he was being hosted warmly and treated kindly by the local people, his elephant, his intuitive self, started to lean toward the people around him. He talks about taking a red pill and finally stepping outside the liberal matrix of the ethic of autonomy.
He began to actually feel the moral logic of their world, rather than just analyzing it. He started to understand the deep moral weight of taking off his shoes before entering a house, physically and symbolically separating the dirty from the clean. He began to see the inherent beauty in a moral code that places a premium on self-control, duty, and service to the group, rather than a relentless pursuit of personal liberty and individual desires.
And if we bring this all the way back home to our own backyards, this framework perfectly explains the American culture war. And again, the goal here is absolute impartiality. If you look at the landscape through this lens, neither side is objectively evil or stupid. They're simply cooking their worldviews using entirely different combinations of the moral taste receptors.
That is the crucial takeaway. The political left, liberals, and progressives tend to rely almost exclusively on the ethic of autonomy. Their moral matrix is built incredibly strongly on concerns about caring for the vulnerable, fighting systemic oppression, and ensuring fairness. It is a highly focused palette.
Meanwhile, the political right conservatives utilize a much broader moral palette. They certainly care about harm and fairness, but they also heavily activate the ethic of community. They place a high moral value on loyalty, patriotism, and respect for authority. And they activate the ethic of divinity, finding immense moral value in sanctity, purity, and traditional moral constraints.
When you begin to understand that these different moral matrices are built on different, deeply innate taste receptors, the culture war fundamentally shifts. It stops looking like a cosmic battle between good and evil and starts looking like a tragic, fundamental misunderstanding of how the other side literally experiences the world.
Okay, let's bring this all together because we have covered an incredible amount of ground today. We've learned that we are not the perfectly rational, logic-driven beings we love to pretend we are. We are driven by our massive, intuitive, emotional elephants. Our conscious reasoning is just a loyal press secretary spinning brilliant arguments to justify whatever the elephant has already decided it wants. And crucially, our moral palettes vary wildly depending on our culture and our specific moral matrix.
The practical, everyday application of this knowledge is immense. Think about the next time you are preparing for a contentious strategy meeting at work, or bracing yourself to sit down for a holiday dinner with a relative whose political views absolutely drive you crazy. You cannot simply attack their writer with a barrage of logic, statistics, and well-reasoned articles.
Because it just won't work.
Right. If their elephant is already leaning away from you in distrust or defensiveness, their press secretary will easily swat away every single fact you present.
Exactly. If you want to actually change someone's mind or even just have a basic productive conversation without yelling, you have to speak to the elephant first. You have to find a way to make their elephant lean toward you. You do that through warmth, genuine respect, and actively searching for common ground. Empathy isn't just a nice buzzword. It is the ultimate scientific antidote to self-righteousness.
It requires the difficult work of stepping outside of your own matrix and genuinely trying to taste the moral flavors the other person is experiencing.
Hmm.
It is incredibly difficult to do in the heat of the moment, but it is realistically the only way we can begin to answer Rodney King's question with a yes.
I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've spent this time talking about how human reasoning evolved not to discover pristine, objective truth, but to win arguments, defend our reputations, and secure our social standing within our specific tribes.
Right.
So I want you to ask yourself this. How much of what you currently consider your own deeply held, fiercely independent truth is actually just a post hoc rationalization? How much of your worldview was expertly, quietly crafted by your inner press secretary just to keep you feeling safe, righteous, and comfortable inside your own matrix?
That is a question that requires a lot of courage to truly think about.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.